So as discussed in the previous video, we are going to just walk step by step backwards with that FOIL method that we talked about before. We're going to walk step by step backwards. So that next step from the trinomial, we had 2x squared, and then we're going to have something x, and then plus 12. And we're going to fill those two blanks in with something. Now remember, these two multiplied to the same thing that 2 times 12 did. So 2 times 12 is 24. Do this over in the blue. You should be able to see this. Okay, so all the numbers that multiply to 24 are 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, and 4 and 6. Now, these two numbers are also going to add up to the middle term, which is 11. Well, the only pair of numbers that we can manipulate to get 11 is the 3 and the 8. And when we add those two, we get 11. So we're going to have positive 3 and positive 8. And then we're going to group these two. Okay. So that next step, we are going to be using the distributive property to eliminate those. Now, once we use the distributive property, we are looking at what we can take out of this set of parentheses. We can take out an x. The only thing that goes into 2 and 3 is 1. So, and again, this is what we kind of talked about yesterday with factoring out that greatest common factor. This is where I like to ask myself, what do I multiply x by to end up with 2x squared? Well, the answer is 2x. And what do I multiply x by to get 3x? 3. Now, in the previous video, you'll notice that at this level, these two sets of parentheses were exactly the same. That's what we need to end up with, is the same set of parentheses. So in this case, I ask, what do I multiply 2x by to get 8x? The answer is 4. And a quick check, 4 times 3 is 12 also. So we're set there. So now we're ready for our two sets of parentheses. One set are these two terms outside, the x plus 4. The other set is 2x plus 3. And that is the factored form for that. Now for the next one, we're going to do the same thing again. Always look for a greatest common factor. There isn't one. So this is where we are going to split up that middle term. And those two numbers that we fill in these blanks with multiply to the same thing as a times c. So it's going to multiply to negative 12. So if I list all the numbers that multiply to negative 12, 1 and 12, 2 and 6, and 3 and 4. And we want them to add up to the middle number, which is negative 4. The only two pair of numbers here that we can manipulate to get negative 4 somehow is the 2 and the 6. And the way we get the negative 4 is if negative 6 was the negative number and 2 was the positive number. So we could put in plus 2 and negative 6. And we're going to group the first two and the last two. So our first job now with the distributive property is we're going to ask ourselves, what can we take out of this first set of parentheses? Well, 2 goes into both 2 and 4, and we can also take out an x. So when we do that, what do we multiply 2x by to get 4x squared? 2x. What do we multiply 2x by to get 2x? 1. And that also helps us remember that 1 that always needs to go there. So we want these two sets of parentheses to be the same. This set and this set, we need to be the same. So what do we multiply 2x by to get negative 6x? The answer is negative 3. And a quick check, negative 3 times 1 is also negative 3, so we're good. So then the final step, going to our two sets of parentheses. The first set are the terms outside, 2x minus 3. The second set is the common set of parentheses, the 2x plus 1. Now for the next one, once again we start by splitting up that middle term. Okay. And again, what will go in to those two blanks, their product is going to be the same as the product of 4 and 3, which is 12. So all the numbers that multiply to 12 are 1 and 12, 2 and 6, and 3 and 4. And we want them to add up to the middle term, which is 7. So the only pair of numbers that we can manipulate to get 7 is the 3 and the 4. 3 plus 4 is 7. So we could put plus 3 here and plus 4 there. And we're going to group the first two terms and the last two terms. So in this case, nothing besides 1 goes into 4 and 3, but we can factor out an x out of that first set. What do we multiply x by to get 4x squared? The answer is 4x. What do we multiply x by to get 3x? And the answer is 3. And again, just like before, we want these two sets of parentheses to be exactly the same. Something has to go out in front here, so I ask myself, what do I multiply 4x by to get 4x? The answer is 1. So our two sets of parentheses, one of them are the values out front, x plus 1. The other set is that common set of parentheses, the 4x plus 3. And finally, D, again looking for a greatest common factor. There isn't one, so we're ready to split them up. 2x squared, something x plus something x plus 6. And we're going to fill in these two blanks with a number whose product is the same as 2 times 6, or 12, once again. So we have 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. And we want them to add up to the middle value, which is negative 7. The only ones that we can manipulate to get negative 7 are the 3 and the 4. And that only happens if they're both negative. So we want negative 3 and negative 4. And you may wonder, does it matter which number goes in which blank? And the answer is no. If you do the distributive property right in that next step, you're going to end up with the same two sets of parentheses. You can put the negative 4 here and the negative 3 here. It does not matter. You could put negative 6 here and 2 here. You would still get the same two sets of parentheses. So now when we use the distributive property, nothing goes into 2 and 3 other than 1. but we can take out an x. What do I multiply x by to get 2x squared? 2x. What do I multiply x by to get negative 3x? Negative 3. So I want 2x minus 3 in my second set of parentheses. So what do I multiply 2x by to get negative 4x? The answer is negative 2. So then my two sets of parentheses, the first one are the outside terms. Second one is that common set of parentheses. Now in the next one, this one does have a greatest common factor. So in this one, what goes into 4, 24, and 36? 4 goes into all of those. And when we factor that out, we have x squared minus 6x plus 9. Now we have an a value of 1 inside there, so now we can go right to our two sets of parentheses. And remember from yesterday, those two numbers are going to multiply to 9. And if you think about it, it's 1 times 9. So the only pairs that do that are 1 and 9 and 3 and 3. And they're going to add up to negative 6. Well, 3 and 3 do if they're both negative. So our two sets of parentheses are x minus 3 and x minus 3. And if you wanted to shorten that up a little bit, you could write that as x minus 3 squared, because anything times itself means squared. So you can shorten that up. Now, in the next one, we don't have a greatest common factor, so we are going to split that up. Something x plus something x plus 1. Now, those two numbers that we fill in that blank with are going to multiply to the same thing, 64 and 1 multiplied to, which is 64. So you can make the list 1 and 64, 2 and 32, 4 and 16, 5 doesn't, 6 doesn't, 7 doesn't, but 8 does, 8 and 8. And we want those to add up to negative 16. So we're going to use the 8 and the 8. And they're both going to be negative. So we'll group the first two terms and the last two terms. And out of those first pair, we can take out an 8 and an x. What do you multiply 8x by to get 64x squared? The answer is 8x. And what do you multiply 8x by to get negative 8x? Multiply it by negative 1. So we want 8x minus 1 here. What do you multiply 8x by to get negative 8x? The answer is negative 1. So our two sets of parentheses are 8x minus 1 and 8x minus 1. And since both sets of parentheses are the same, you can shorten that by writing 8x minus 1 squared. Now, G and H are some special cases where there is no B value. It is 0. So if you want to think about this, there is a shortcut to this, but I'm not going to show you that. If you figure out what that shortcut is, good for you. Otherwise, we can just follow the same method by splitting up that middle term, which, keep in mind, is 0. So if we take 25 times negative 49, and if you did that, that would be 1225. And we want them to add up to 0. Okay, well, the only way you get two numbers that add up to 0 is if they're opposites of each other. So it's basically going to be the square root of this 35 and negative 35. Okay, you can put that in there. If you found the square root of 1225 with your calculator, you would find that that's 35. I can explain to you in class how I know that. And we'll wait for the computer to catch up. There we go. So we're going to put negative 35 in one, positive 35 in the other. Again, it doesn't matter which one you put in which blank. So in that first set, we can factor out a 5x. 5 goes into both 25 and 35. And we can take out an x. What do we multiply 5x by to get 25x squared? 5x. What do you multiply 5x by to get negative 35x? Negative 7. So we want 5x minus 7 in the second set. Again, we want those two sets of parentheses to be the same. They need to be identical. So what do we multiply 5x by to end up with 35x? The answer is 7. So then our two sets of parentheses. First one, we can put the terms outside, 5x plus 7. And the second one, 5x minus 7. Now, for the last one, again, we don't have a greatest common factor, so we'll jump straight to the split. Now, again, these two middle values, they're going to add up to 0 because there is no middle term. So 16 times negative 81, that is going to be negative. I'm going to hit pause here while I run and get a calculator. So now, when we took 16 times negative 81, that is negative 1,296. But we want those two numbers to add up to 0. So we're going to find the square root of 1,296. And we've got 36. And negative 36. Those two would add up to 0 and multiply to negative 1296. So we're going to put negative 36 in one, positive 36 in the other. Group the first two and the last two. So out of that first set, we can factor out a 4. 4 goes into both 16 and 36, and an x. What do we multiply 4x by to get 16x squared? We multiply 4x. What do we multiply 4x by to get negative 36x? Negative 9. So in our second set of parentheses, we want to end up with 4x minus 9. What do I multiply 4x by to get 36x? Multiply that by 9. And our two sets of parentheses. The terms outside, and in the second set, that common set of parentheses. And once again, in this practice, we are just practicing the skill of factoring. That's one of the methods we can use to find the x-intercepts of these parabolas. and solve these quadratic equations. So before we talk about how this applies to those parabolas and how this applies to those x-intercepts, we're just going to practice factoring many of these trinomials, these quadratic trinomials.